and gentlemen, I call to order the work session for the Sierra Vista City Council for 23 February. All members are present. So we'll go to the presentation, the discussion. The first is the item A is the 25 February council meeting agenda and minutes. And of course, we start with our call to order, roll call, invocation, pledge of allegiance, and acceptance of the agenda. Any comments on those first parts from the council or questions, standard stuff? We now go to the city manager's report. Mr. Tuchik, would you like to enlighten us on anything today?
No, not yet. I'm still waiting for my updated report from procurement. So
Okay.
Keep us in suspense.
looks like the one I got looks suspiciously like last time's.
Okay. Sarah, did you have something?
No, I was thinking.
Okay,
I was
so
being snarky.
you're being snarky. Well, you're authorized. Okay, item 2 is the consent agenda, which consists of the special city council meeting minutes for February 9 and the approval of the regular city council meeting minutes. Any comments, questions, corrections, additions, deletions on those two items?
Question.
Ma'am.
So I was not in attendance at the special meeting, but I was in attendance at the other meeting. So I need to abstain from, like, approving the minutes of the meeting I wasn't
Make it
there for, but I was there for the
Now
other.
you're making me think on a Tuesday afternoon, late. Tuesday afternoon.
No, so then,
That's a challenge.
how do you do that?
Well, there's two ways to do it. Either you can abstain from both, or you can just say, Mr. Mayor, I abstain from item 2 point whatever it
Of the
was.
consent agenda?
Of the consent agenda.
Okay,
And then we'll record the vote that the consent agenda was approved.
okay.
Does that meet everything?
I think
gave me a
if
funny look
you
there.
want to abstain, we'll just break them out, and they'll
Okay.
just be regular new business and voted separately,
Okay,
if you want to abstain on one,
yeah, we can do
since the
that.
vote is
I wasn't
combined.
present for one of the meetings, so it wouldn't be appropriate.
That's fine, we'll
Okay.
just break them out.
Okay, so we can do that. Anything else? Okay. We now go to public hearing items. Item number 3. Mr. Pregler is gonna talk to us about development code text amendment. Mr. Pregler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. So every year, Community Development develops an annual work program in coordination with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council, which identifies ways to improve efficiencies, clarify requirements, and help citizens move through the development process more easily. This practice is consistent with the City Council initiatives to make codes and processes more efficient and streamlined. The amendments before you reflect these goals. So the amendments in Resolution 2021-013 relate to reasonable modifications and are in response to public comments requesting home modifications to accommodate a disability. So the question is, what is a reasonable modification and why is it necessary to have a separate process? So reasonable modifications are to be defined as a means to provide disabled persons flexibility in the application of a structure's dimensional standards and lot coverage area requirements and procedures when necessary to eliminate barriers to housing opportunities. In other words, to create a process that would allow the reduction of building setbacks, height increases that extend above the zoning height maximums, or increases in lot coverage areas for the purposes of accommodating a disability. And again, just to clarify, lot coverage area simply means that you're limiting the amount of area that structures can occupy in a property. A lot of codes, for example, will limit structure to 35% of the overall lot, whereas the other 65% has to remain open, as one example of that. And again, because of the potential increase in the structure, a request to increase the lot coverage area may be needed as a result. Now, the current process to waive the dimensional standards is through a variance process, which is a public hearing that is heard before the city's hearing officer. Due to the strict criteria of the variance process, many of the requests for reasonable modification would be denied. In addition to which, the federal and state Fair Housing Acts state that prohibited discrimination includes a refusal to prohibit, and at the expense of the person with a disability, reasonable modifications of an existing premises occupied or to be occupied by such persons, if such modifications may be necessary to afford such person full enjoyment of the premises. So it's really for these reasons, and of course to be in compliance with the Fair Housing Act, that a separate reasonable modification process is being recommended. Now the process itself will be administrative rather than a public hearing, with the reviewing authority being the Director of Community Development. The application will be reviewed and approved based upon proposed findings as stated in the Development Code. The affected neighbor or neighbors will be notified of the request and can provide comment, which will be considered as part of the review process. Conditions can be placed on their approval to minimize the impacts on neighboring property owners if necessary.
Do you have to find neighbors?
Neighbors, well, in this case, it would be, the affected neighbor would be the adjacent neighbor that
So
the,
if we're talking a rectangular property, we're talking north, south, east, and west, as well as northeast, southeast, southwest,
that's correct.
and whatever one I left out.
Doesn't it mean like 500 feet, they have to
Or is
notify?
it 500 feet? They have to be abutting properties.
Budding.
Be an abutting property
And
owner.
is
in
that,
this case.
is that identified somewhere in the code?
I can add that just to clarify that.
Okay, that'd be a good, I think that'd be a good idea, because we will get questions.
Absolutely, good catch. All right, so to verify the modification is needed to accommodate a disability, the applicant is required to submit a written certification of need for the requested accommodation from a medical doctor. For privacy purposes, the city will not be requesting the applicant to disclose the disability. Now, one of the advantages of having this as an administrative process is if this were to go to a public hearing, that disability could potentially be revealed. However, in this particular case, because it's left at an administrative level, the privacy will be maintained as a result.
And we don't want it revealed, because that would violate the Privacy Act, is that my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay.
So the Commission on Disabilities did unanimously recommend these text amendments at their December 9th meeting. The Planning and Zoning Commission also recommended unanimous approval at their February 16th meeting. Now, staff has not received any public comments. However, should the council approve the resolution, it will open up a 30-day public comment period. This does conclude staff's report, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions? Ma'am?
No question. Under your definition of disability, you include the sentence, does not include use or addiction to a controlled substance. Why was that sentence included?
From the definition that I received, I actually received the definition from, we have something called a planning dictionary. And it's kind of a national standard that a lot of jurisdictions use to get them from other communities that have these definitions set in place. And that particular definition did exclude addictive substances as from the definition of disability.
I'm just like looking at other ADA regulations, it's never, like, there's no other disability regulation that even mentions. It's just not something mentioned. It just seems unnecessary to me.
It was put in for clarification purposes to clarify that, you know, addictive substances addiction is not necessarily a disability in this particular case and how we're using the term. That's the reason why it was placed in there for clarification purposes. If you feel it wanted to be removed, I'd be more than happy to remove that sentence from the definition.
But we're talking about like setbacks, really,
Yeah.
is what this is related to.
Correct.
So like additional garage or a way to navigate the property that might reduce their setbacks would be an example of what this
Right,
would be
that's
used for.
correct.
Because more mobility.
So then it doesn't even apply. I don't know. It seemed like a totally unnecessary addition to the definition. And I don't think that disability and addiction are necessarily mutually exclusive. So that's what worries me. It's all like disability and addiction are not like conditions that are mutually exclusive conditions, that you wouldn't want to create a condition that where someone could have an addiction and also be disabled. And you could say, well,
They would fall in on one or the other.
yeah, but
It would qualify for this on one or the other, I would think.
I don't like that sentence. I don't think it needs to be there. I think it's totally unnecessary to call it out. And I've never, like, in every other ADA regulation, it's not there.
Well, it's because it's not mentioned
Well,
at all.
according to ADA.gov, it says to be considered a disability under the ADA, it would have to pose a substantial limitation on one or more major life activities.
Yep.
So it actually is in there.
But it doesn't recommend, it doesn't talk about addiction.
But it doesn't.
I just quoted the ADA.gov website.
Does it talk about addiction?
No.
No. But it's inclusive in the
A
definition.
person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability but are regarded as having a disability. Does not mention addiction or a controlled substance.
So
Not even a mention.
you're saying it should be assumed, and that's not the way
That's
the
not
law is.
what- that's
That's
not what
not
we're
the way
talking
the
about.
law is written.
It's not the way the law is written, it's not even relevant. It's not relevant to the discussion.
Well, you certainly can make an amendment, since we don't have a lot of discussion, you certainly can make an amendment to that effect to have it removed on Thursday. I don't see a lot of other council people worried about that item. Greg?
I would just, could you give the council some examples of previous discussions that you've had over this that have been denied in the past, that could be remedied by this new proposed reasonable modification?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Johnson. I've actually had two conversations with some folks, and really in the last 6 months, and this has only come up recently, where somebody's come in claiming they have a disability. They wanted to specifically expand a garage, enclose a carport and turn it into a garage, but they needed to have a certain width requirement for a family member that was in a wheelchair. And the lot was so small, they didn't have enough room to do that. But under this process, it would allow them to provide that additional space needed, even though they may have to cross a setback, 2 or 3 feet. It allowed them that accommodation for them to put their family member in a wheelchair and then get them into the house, as an example.
Okay.
So that's the most recent discussions I've had with people. Is
Okay.
really the expansion of the garages. In terms of a height requirement, if a detached garage, for example, you can have a height of 15 feet. There may be some situations where these vans, the disability vans, are pretty high, and they may need additional height for that. That's why height's included in here. But beyond those two situations, I don't foresee there being a need beyond those two reasons to maybe have somebody go through that process, other than for those two reasons.
Thank you. And one more question. One thing that troubles me about this, we make reasonable accommodations for a person that's currently living in that home, and then that home is sold to a new party. So now we've got
This came up at the end.
we've got a non-conforming, basically a non-conforming structure.
Is it grandfathered?
How do we get around that? Is there something that has to be placed in this code amendment
Right.
for that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Johnson. This was actually brought up at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and actually the code language, which I got a lot of this information from, had some conditions of approval specific to that answer. Some of those recommendations were that we record a document that would indicate that they went through this modification process and it has to be removed once the new owner takes ownership of this house. Other considerations were that we would require a random go in and basically check randomly to see if it's still needed for the same purpose as it was approved for. We had a discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it would really be an enforcement nightmare, quite frankly. I mean, to try to figure out when somebody's selling their house or leaving and selling property to somebody else, it would be really difficult to track down, to be honest with you. There are certainly ways we could do it, but again, it would just take a lot of time to do something like that. That was kind of the discussion that we had at the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that's why we left it as is.
Okay.
It would run with the land. It wouldn't run with the
With the owner?
owner, right? It would run with the land.
It has
Thank
to go
you.
with the land.
do I remember correctly when it came up, when Brad brought it up, about that being an issue and maybe landlords using the, like a tenant to exploit the setbacks and stuff, and just knowing it's temporary. You said you were gonna look in how other cities and towns, I think I remember you saying you would find examples. Did you get a chance?
Can you
Well,
answer her question?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Humphrey, I did look at other codes as we had talked about before, and like I said, other communities have these other recommendations or requirements in place to ensure that wouldn't necessarily happen. Like I said, they have the inspections they would do. They would, follow up to make sure that it's needed for this particular purpose. Again, with our discussion with the P&Z Commission, we realized that there might be an opportunity where somebody may take advantage of this process. It's just, unfortunately, it's going to happen just like it is with the dogs, where people take the assistive dogs in restaurants and buses. I mean, people take advantage of that system all the time. And I think that may happen in this particular case. If we just can't stop every single person from taking advantage of. We can do what we can, have all these safeguards in place, but ultimately that might fall through the cracks.
Okay, thanks.
Sir?
I'm good, Mr. Mayor, I think.
I just, as a general, just kind of my own rule, I like to be as least intrusive as possible. And going in and checking with people sounds awful to me.
Well, I think the way it's written now is they're proposing that we don't.
Right.
Okay.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think I
if
agree
it's
with you.
not causing a problem, I mean, and on also legislating or writing code based on what if someone does
Or one instance.
is not a good idea. I mean, especially if it's never happened. What if someone could possibly? That's not how you should write code, in my opinion. And so I'm in favor of staying away from that as much as possible. But
Mr. Petichik wants to weigh
Yeah,
in here.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, clearly this situation doesn't occur very often
Right.
anyway. And if it does, generally the neighbors are already used to what's there. And if they, have been comfortable with it before, I doubt if it would be a problem in the future.
can I clarify just to make sure the things, normal modifications that are made to homes, do they require permits like wheelchair ramps and putting in bars in bathrooms, like does that even require a permit, or people can do that kind of stuff like without even asking? I mean, that kind of stuff, the main purpose of this is that we want people to be able to make modifications so that those with disabilities can live in their homes and have access and have accessibility and not have the city be a roadblock. I mean, that's the whole purpose. And are those kind of, I would think that wheelchair ramps and things are more common. Is that the case?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Pacheco, to answer your question, first of all, everything will require a building permit. Even this particular process, after they get approved, they still have to require them to obtain a building permit for the construction of the building. But that is correct. A lot of what you're asking for, if it's structurally related, it would require a building permit. Grab bars may not necessarily require a permit. And a lot of things interior, again, wouldn't necessarily apply to this process either. We're talking about exterior structural accommodations. Interior improvements, again, if it's not structurally related, wouldn't necessarily require a building permit. But if it did, again, wouldn't necessarily fall under this criteria. Again, this is specific to setbacks and height itself.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion or questions for Jeff?
I have one other question.
Yes, ma'am.
On number 3 on page, special regulations for particular, it doesn't have a page number at the bottom on mine. It's page 26 of my packet, so that's all I can say. Where it says assistance, that this, if they need if an applicant needs assistance making a request, the city will endeavor to provide assistance. That, and then the city will attempt to balance privacy rights with the reasonable request of the applicant. I just feel like, I don't know, if there's a way that we can really show that we're how do we provide that assistance to those with disabilities, to provide assistance? Do you know what I mean? Is there a way that we can make it clear that we provide assistance to accommodate those with disabilities in making those requests?
Sure, I'm going to kind of be more specific in how we would recommend those, or how we provide that assistance to the individual.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't know. Or even if there's a policy to reference, like we probably have a policy in how we can provide assistance to those with disabilities, if you could even reference.
Or you
Well,
could
I
just
I
strike
think
the-
it refers to requesting the reasonable modifications. If they don't understand how to fill the form out or understand what permits to ask for, they can help through that process. I don't think it's like
That's-
on site.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
And then we do, that's normal practice if you've,
Roger.
it has been, at least since Bob Strain was mayor, where people will come up and say, here's an issue, and these guys will basically talk them through how they need to do whatever the function needs, whatever they need to perform their function,
Yeah.
and get the
Permit.
permits filled out properly.
Inspections, et
So
cetera.
that's already going on.
Okay.
I believe it is already going on, but, to clean up number 3, I would just strike endeavor to, and then it'll read, the city will provide the assistance necessary, and then everybody's happy.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
that's a good language change.
So, too.
Matt, can you live with that?
Thank you.
I thought so.
There you go.
Okay.
Not a problem.
All righty, any other further discussion on this one?
No.
No, sir.
Okay, we now go to item number 4, which is again,
Jeff.
Development Code Text Amendment for the public hearing process. Mr. Pregler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. The amendments in Resolution 2021-014 relate to revising the public hearing process for conditional use permits, rezonings, and text amendments. Now, the current review and approval process for these requests require public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. Along with the public hearings are required public notification requirements, notifying the public of the hearing dates, as is required by state law. These requirements include newspaper ads, posting signs on the property, if applicable, and mailing letters to all owners within 500 feet of the property. Again, if it's site specific. And the process takes approximately 45 to 60 days. However, the Arizona Revised Statutes does provide for an expedited public hearing process for local municipalities. According to ARS, if the Planning Commission has held a public hearing, then the governing body may adopt the recommendations of the Planning Commission without holding a second public hearing if there is no objection or request for public hearing. In other words, following the public hearing from the P&Z Commission, the City Council can approve the recommendations from the Commission without requiring that second public hearing if there are no objections, protests, or requests for a public hearing. Again, just to be clear, the Council will still vote on the items, but the notification requirements for a public hearing will not be required, and the items can be placed on the next available Council agenda, which helps to expedite the process.
Before we go to the next step, Jeff, I just want to comment, as long as I'm sitting in the chair up here, we're going to continue to operate like we have operated. If, when the item is called before the council for the final meeting, if there are people that would like to address us once we've had the staff presentation, they will be allowed to be addressed. And that is a public hearing, although not a official public hearing. And so I intend to keep doing that. I think that's been a good shown to be a good practice since we started it over 10 years ago now.
Right. I agree, Mr.
Can we
Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, may we codify that within this text amendment?
Well,
I think that's important.
I'd prefer to, unless you really want to get deep into why we have public hearings and why we don't have public hearings. And this isn't all, this only applies to
Conditional use.
the conditional use,
Conditional uses, rezonings, and text amendments.
okay, so it's very limited. All the other things we have the big projects, we have oodles of public input and comment. So the whole idea is to expedite this so that we don't spend 60, 90, 120 days on an item that should take less than 60. Because we have, it's every 2 weeks, we do P and Z, and we do 2 weeks after that, we do this, and then we have to publish in the paper for 30 days, and I mean, it just drags out, and there's plenty of opportunity, and these aren't, in my opinion, these items aren't big things, like you can see how many people we had for the text amendments to talk to us today, that we just looked at. People just aren't, quite frankly, interested in a lot of that stuff.
Chuck wants to talk to us.
Chuck, I'm putting my foot in my mouth, you gonna stop me?
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, clearly, there are, state statute-driven, items that, must follow public input. And it has been our practice that all items are actually public hearing items, the way that they're treated by the council. In terms of what Mr. Johnson's suggesting, probably a better place to put that would be your council handbook, as opposed to codifying it in code, as a suggestion.
Well, I can certainly live with that.
Right, and I think the difference
I like
is
that.
we're talking about public hearing versus public input, which is
Yeah.
more what you're talking about. Public hearing is a very
Formal.
formal process.
So we'd be getting, like for zoning changes, modifications, we'd be getting rid of the 30-day public hearing after we vote on.
As long as there's no objections or there's no protests, there's still the option, if somebody doesn't like it, they can still object or protest, and then we would have to have a public hearing. If we get a letter that says, I'm opposed to this,
Then it goes 30 days.
then we're gonna have to go through the public hearing process.
Okay.
That's right.
So like Kmart, I'll just use for example, we could have bypassed, when we rezoned Kmart so U-Haul could move in, we could have bypassed the 30-day public hearing that we did, approved it unless somebody complained.
Yeah, Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Benning, there might be some confusion regarding rezonings and text amendments. Text amendments requires an additional 30-day public comment period, I think what you're referring to. Conditional use permits and rezonings are approved typically with that one meeting. They don't
Okay.
require an additional meeting. And if it is a text amendment that we're referring to in this case, the council will have the option of either adopting an ordinance that night or extending it for another 30 days.
That's right, and that's the thing, is if the council feels we need to hear from the public, we can also say, we can wait another 30 days.
Right.
So we have that option already under the law.
Okay,
It provides additional flexibility in the process.
thank
is
you
what it is. Yeah.
for that clarification, I appreciate it.
Okay, so, again, we've already talked about this, but it's in my presentation, so I'll mention it again. Should there be an objection or protest regarding the item, or if there is a request to take the item to public hearing, then a second public hearing before the council would be scheduled. An objection, protest, or request for a public hearing needs to be submitted within 7 days from the commission's recommendation. So, in accordance with Arizona revised statutes, staff is also including language that requires the city to notify Fort Huachuca of all proposed conditional use permits and rezonings to ensure there are no adverse impacts to their missions. Also in compliance with state law, a public hearing will be required before the city council if Fort Huachuca has any comments or concerns regarding an item. Again, this language is codifying current practice as the city already sends all requests for development to the Fort Huachuca Encroachment Board for their review and comment.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
You're saying that we want to send all conditional use permits to Fort Huachuca, because we don't do that for like residential conditional use permits and stuff. do
Council,
we?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Pacheco, we do send all requests for conditional use permits, all rezonings, all site plans, all subdivision plats to Fort Huachuca Encroachment Board for their review and comment.
We just don't hear from them very often.
We hear from them all the time. Normally they come back with
You
no
don't.
comment.
Yeah, they come back.
Yeah.
Oh, I meant,
Yeah.
We don't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Typically, it's
Like
done through
they
the
don't-
administrative review
Yeah.
process, and we will handle their comments. If there is a question, we would typically refer those comments to the developer, and they'll respond accordingly, and they're typically satisfied with those answers. So,
And there hasn't been any big hubbub about encroachment because we go through this process. The last time we had I think a meaningful discussion when we were talking about, putting up, transmission towers in certain places and whether or not they would affect the electronic test range. But that, again, that came back as a no comment, but it's important that we have that conversation with Fort Huachuca at a staff level.
Right.
So that we're not interfering with potential future missions.
okay, so additional amendments include the removal of obsolete or duplicative language. The Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend unanimous approval of the amendments on February 16th. Again, staff has not received any public comments on these amendments. Again, approval of the resolution will open the 30-day public comment period. I do want to mention that these amendments are currently available on the website for anybody to review and comment. So this concludes staff support, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions for Jeff or any discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So can we go through some of the changes? Are you saying in the, when you're saying commission and council, are you saying that both commission and council can impose, or that they have to approve and give authority, to changes, or both? Because a lot of the changes either say commission and council can impose in addition to.
Can you give us a citation, please?
Okay, this is section 151 dot 26.003. So for me, that's page 35. I need the digital
Give us the number again, 151
26.003. That was my first question. Cross-reference my notes here with my digital.
I'm missing it, I think.
No, it's back further, or,
It's the second
It's the
page.
second
Second
page
page.
on Exhibit A.
yeah.
Oh, there we go.
So where specifically are you talking?
Where they put in commission and, to commission and council. So it says, it used to say council can impose in addition to those standards and requirements expressly specified by this code, and they put in commission and council can impose. So I just
Right here.
wanna understand how is that less restrictive?
Well, the problem I have with adding commission is
It gives them a little,
commissions just make recommendations. They don't impose.
exactly.
That's exactly my point.
That should be
Point.
struck, that
So
should be
that needs to
struck.
be,
Mr.
that needs to
Mayor.
be rewritten.
Okay.
Good catch.
Because like, yeah.
That's a
And
good
there's a
point.
couple other places, the same thing, where it felt like it was almost putting the planning and zoning commission in place of the council, the way it was written.
We could take
Mr.
impose
Mayor?
out, put recommend.
Sir,
We could just reword this. Instead of the commission and council can impose, put the commission may recommend and the council can impose.
yeah, and that's a good suggestion. I don't want to get us in the position of rewriting things here at the
Well,
last, but
you know-
I would ask staff that you understand what our concern is.
I understand.
I would ask you to go back and scrub the document, and any language that is in this territory that may be questionable, we need to correct.
Okay, we can, that can be done fairly quickly, Mr.
It
Mayor.
should be easy to do.
Yep.
And then, of course, we'll need to see a copy of this, probably tomorrow. I'm guessing. It's gonna have to be put out anyway, right?
These are public hearing
We can do that.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to go to 151-26 also, 00.
Yeah. 005 says the same thing, it was like
006
considered
does
by
too.
commission, and they took out council. So it would only be considered
So
by,
what other references, just help Jeff out, give him the rest of the references and he'll.
section 151.26.005.
15126.006.
So Mayor, on Thursday night, this still is going to a 30-day public
Yeah.
Yeah,
process, right? So
yeah, I'd just
it
like to get
wouldn't-
as cleaned up as
Right.
possible before we go to the 30-day comment period.
Just want to make sure we're not
So
passing it.
it's not, it's not immediately that it has to be Christine when we vote to go to a 30-day period. We just need to get as close as possible.
But then it's correct in section 151.2600. What used to be 7 is now 6.
Yeah, that's the
It
one I
says,
told him.
shall recommend approval.
That's the kind of language we're looking for.
That's the language we're looking for, but it says approval twice. Commission shall recommend approval with conditions, or denial.
Well, those are two separate things.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So
yeah,
we need to do some editing. I think you got the message, right? Okay. And some scrubbing, right, Matt? Okay. Any other discussion on this item? Okay. Any other questions for Jeff while he's still on the hook?
Mr. Mayor,
Sir.
is this time sensitive?
We
You know,
have-
there's been a lot of work already put into this, and to say we need a clean copy tomorrow.
Well, well,
I
it's
don't-
not really, I forgot about the 30-day public comment period. It doesn't need to absolutely be, we don't, it would be nice to have a copy tomorrow. We need to have a copy by Thursday at least, so we can see what's there, when we put it out for the 30-day public period. What I would hope to do is, when we put out things to the public, it's gotta be as close to perfection and clear. That's the main thing here, is right now it's not clear in a couple points, so that the public that reads this will come away, yeah, that makes sense, that we don't wanna get 50 emails saying, oh, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this. We want to show that we have a professional, some type of.
Well, that's why I
you know-
bring up the time factor, I mean, if we postpone this for,
Well, we're not gonna postpone it.
okay.
At least I'm not, unless we have a motion to do that on the table. I don't think we do.
Well, I'm just,
I think- I
I'm just
think-
thinking about staff time and.
Well,
the
I
amount
think
of-
the staff can make those minor corrections fairly quickly. They have in the past.
We can handle it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then if it's a public comment period, if we miss one, we can obviously correct it during the 30-day
Okay.
comment period. So it's not a big thing.
I just-
I forgot about the 30-day comment period. That's why I made that comment earlier.
And we vote on it again,
And we vote on it again at that time, so,
the cleaned up copy.
All right.
okay. Now we're ready for Mrs. Flassar. Sharon?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff recently became aware of a grant opportunity being offered through the Department of Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, for small-scale water efficiency projects. The grant criteria is a good match for some planned irrigation work on the recently acquired Rothery Sports Complex.
The
and
Sierra
could-
Vista Sports Annex, or the,
Yeah.
what's the park?
Veterans Park
Veterans
Sports.
Memorial Park Sports Annex.
Okay, Veterans Memorial Park Sports Annex, and could potentially help to partially offset the cost of irrigation upgrades. The maximum grant award is $75,000. Grant applications are due March 18th, and one of the required elements in the application package is a resolution of support from the governing body. It is important to note that the resolution is for grant application only. Funding is not guaranteed, and if staff is successful in its application, an additional action will be brought before council to accept the terms and conditions of the grant. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Sir?
What terms and conditions typically, Sharon, are attached to grants of this nature?
I'm not familiar with grants specifically of this nature. This would be a federal grant, so it would have most likely it would have Davis-Bacon wages associated with it, and other federal clauses, but the city, to the best of my knowledge, has never pursued this particular grant. So the assurances and all those things would come in with the grant offer, and we would have an opportunity to either accept those or decline those at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Mrs. Flassar? Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Okay, then, that's the last voting. We got next call the public comments and request of council and adjournment. So we'll go on to item B, which is the FY 2021 mid-year budget review. Mr. Petitchik,
Mr. Felix will be
Mr.
making
Felix,
the
okay.
presentation, and I'll comment on the way, along the way.
Mayor, members of council, usually I'm considered Mr. Doom and Gloom, but, you know, lately, I've been shocking people with some relatively good and not bad news, and this kind of follows that trend. At the mid-year, we were doing well. As you've seen from the financial that came out, we are ahead of budget in revenue. Three key pieces to that, two key pieces to that is first is the Arizona CARES Act funding. As you remember in the budget discussions, we had planning on using half of that last fiscal year, half of it this fiscal year, but due to the savings with the unfortunate COVID crisis and salaries and the extra internet sales revenue that we had, we were able to defer all of that grant revenue to this fiscal year. That is the key reason we are show ahead of budget. Also the fact that we received all of the money in July. Normally grants are on a reimbursement basis, so you always see the grant revenue lagging the expenditures, but we've plugged that in and we've already reported that to the state and the feds as all used for police and fire salaries. So that grant is actually, as far as I'm concerned, in the closeout stage, waiting for final items. They have approved the submission of our reimbursement and closed it out on their side. So we used all $4.9 million this fiscal year. So that is the key, probably the number one reason why we are doing well this fiscal year is the carryover from last year. Other good news is state shared revenues are ahead of budget. They're actually 11%, and that is due to the state increase in sales tax and the state vehicle license tax. As many of you know from being in town and seeing actually some of the challenges some of the dealerships have had getting cars on the lot with the incentives, our vehicle license tax revenues are ahead of budget under state shared, and then the state shared sales tax is actually ahead of budget as well. On the local side, our local sales tax revenues, as you've seen from the reports have been giving out, are also well ahead of budget. December is our biggest year, so in your next council report, when you see that we're 15% ahead of budget on sales tax, that will be decreasing over time because we do not try and plug in any cyclicality into our revenue projection. It is simply the annual divided by 2. So when you get your number one month of the year by far in December, that'll skew it up. You'll see that 15% of it will gradually decrease through the end of the fiscal year. In addition, as the legislature always told us, the internet sales don't really amount to anything. That not amounting to much has given us $500,000 in additional sales tax revenue from July through December. So that the Wayfair lawsuit has also benefited us greatly. I think people shopping in town has been a benefit since obviously a lot of Tucson stores have been closed down due to the crisis. I will highlight that for the most part, our hotel is down, and we've had 30 or 40% down and 8% down at times. And as bad as that is for local hoteliers, talking with the PAO, there's a lot of cities that would love to be this well off. The concerns we have going forward for our sales tax and these types of revenues are there is a new administration who has taken a different view, has historically taken a different view of the military and the border wall and the enforcement on the border. So we're going to have to see in the next few months, in the next couple of years, how the changes in governmental priorities may affect things.
Mr. Mayor, and members of the council, I do expect to see hotel and motel revenues drift downward as a result of the wall construction being halted. We're filling up a lot of rooms with those workers, and I think we'll see that drift down.
And you probably can, over the longer period, you're probably gonna have less military travel too, so those are two important
But
things.
those were temporary things anyway, so.
Well, with gas going up to like $2.60 a gallon, people are gonna stay local, so weighs it out.
And in addition, we will not see the effect because the lag, February sales are reported through March, and the sales tax report is not completed until April. So it'll be about 2 months before we can start to see the effect of the freezing of the construction of the wall. The general fund transfer, we're going to not be doing that this year. Unfortunately, as part of the COVID crisis and the China situation, manufacturers are having problems getting chips for the police vehicles. So the current year budgeted police vehicles, which is this year's and last year's, are not expected until July, August, September, if they can get them. This is all manufacturers, not just the Chevys we've gone to. In addition, they're expecting that to be occurring next fiscal year as well. The procurement CPO is working to try and find some extra vehicles. There is comment that a dealership in Texas routinely orders extra vehicles, so we might try to get a few more to try and get a couple extra in next year if we can in the first part of the year. But the $1 million for those vehicles will be carrying over, so there's no need to transfer that to the general fund this year.
David, will you stop a minute? Chief, immediate impact on your fleet?
Right now, we're doing okay, but we still have some of the Crown Vics out there that are really high mileage as you've
Yeah,
seen them. So,
so-
but this will put us down 14 vehicles on the replacement. So we're limping along, but we're making it do.
Okay, so your officers are still out in the street even though they don't have the new stuff?
We may have to cut holes in the floorboard and run their vehicles, but they'll get there.
Red Flintstone, okay.
Mr. Mayor, it also puts a little bit of a crimp in our rotation schedule, and it will create a bubble next year, and puts a little bit of a burden on our vehicle maintenance
Absolutely.
folks as well. So there are some impacts to that.
But
But
vehicle maintenance costs, I would imagine gonna go up a little bit too. Okay.
Well, our fleet does a good job of cannibalizing any vehicle they're getting ready to try and auction. Trust me, we've had to go back out and pull them off as they've needed to take parts off of them to keep other vehicles going in the past. They do a great job of cutting every corner and scrounging everything they can from outgoing vehicles. On the expenditure side, the two biggest savings are mostly personnel. The police department is down about $300,000 on salaries due to some vacant positions that have come out. And then when you factor in the 60-some% PSPRS burden rate, that's not that many officers, but still, we know that they'd like to be fully staffed. The second place is pretty much the COVID-related closures, leisure being shut down, still some for what they normally operate and things like that. The other thing is we did budget this year, we did budget the school district's fuel because they were buying fuel from us, but they did complete the fuel farm, and of course, they're not running very many buses anyway. But that expenditure has not occurred, and so we are below budget and below revenue on the actual fleet fuel sales and fuel expenditures. They are at like 36% spent for the year. And we'll adjust this coming year's budget to remove the school, but they are with no travel going on in the city, other agencies not traveling, and fuel purchases down. That's a big savings in the fleet department as well. So be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Questions for Mr. Felix? I'll just tell you as you go through this and try to digest this, especially the new council members. This is kind of a new way of doing things, at least it was for me. If you don't understand what's going on, please talk to Victoria and Chuck and Mr. Felix so that you can come to a comfortable understanding as to what this report means.
Another last thing to point out is when you look at the department division expenditures, there are certain expenses departments have during the fiscal year which can skew the numbers. For instance, most maintenance contracts for IT are due at the beginning of the fiscal year. So they may look over budget when in fact that is a normal expenditure. And likewise in finance, when we have to pay the $115,000 Department of Revenue fee to collect our taxes for us, that can skew the number. Usually parks used to buy all their stuff late in the season because that's when you want to buy your topsoil and seed, and that type of thing is in the April-May timeframe to seed the fields. That can look under budget when in fact that's their normal cycle of spending. So there's nothing that's been standing out as any issues as far as the expenditure side.
Sir?
I know that the city's been working very hard to work on the PSPRS issue.
Yes.
Are we able to, at mid-year, be able to say, okay, we're looking pretty good, we can throw some extra money in that fund? Or how does that work, Dave?
Mr. Pedic?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Johnson, what we've been doing in terms of PSPRS is we budget fully for what we think the amount will be at the start of the year. There's always turnover in the police department, retirements, et cetera. So the final bill actually ends up being less than what we budgeted. So we make that payment first part of the fiscal year right away for the full budget amount. So we're automatically paying extra right away.
Okay.
It also helps us in terms of interest expense and, taking advantage of any investment, gains that the fund might have. So this is the first year where we're actually seeing a potential decrease in terms of unfunded liability percentage since we started doing this about 3 years ago now, I think it was, Dave. So the plan that we have in place seems to be working. Now, to get back to your point about where we're at this fiscal year, with this report that we're giving you today, we're set up very, very well for next fiscal year, both in terms of the projects that we kind of deferred this year because of COVID. We didn't know the situation we were going to be going into from an economic standpoint. So we should make significant progress next year on the projects that are in the council's strategic plan. And we should have a healthy fund balance that we will make a recommendation to the council. There's two areas of primary concern, PSPRS being one of them, and then the funds that we owe the Park Development Fund that council voted to add extra funding to last fiscal year. So I think we'll be able to make some progress and make some good recommendations to you with regards to that. So
Thank
We're
you.
also looking at certain capital projects that were on this year's list and last year's list that have been cut. They will be seen on the capital projects list coming up for next fiscal year. The primary example is the carpeting for the police station, which has been cut from the last 5 years of budgets because of being a lower priority than some of the other items that get done. If some of the items are getting to the point we really have to look at it, so we're looking at, can we do the whole project? Can these projects be phased? What might we be able to fit in this year too that will also help us next year in the budget process? So we'll be putting together a whole list of all of that. Also, Councilmember Johnson, so you understand, the currently adopted fiscal policy says that if we can hold the contribution rate the same, if it actually required contribution rate decreases. So when we put the budget together, we've received preliminary notification that both police and fire contribution rates are supposed to drop by 3% next year. We're going to try to balance the budget at the current year contribution, which will add extra contribution to next year as well.
Okay, good.
So that's been that's the adopted council policy when we put it together 2 years ago, Mayor, 3 years ago?
Don't quote me. I know, I remember we put it together, but anything else, Mr. Felix?
No.
Any other questions for Mr. Felix?
Just one more thing, on the capital expenditures, I see we're up over the mid-year budget. Was that due to the purchasing of that red little strip mall on the west end there, or?
That would be part of it. And the big part of that is the purchase of the VMPSA, Veterans Memorial Park Sports Annex. The $1 million was paid for at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Got it.
Ms.
Okay.
Yarborough?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Johnson, I think it's important to remember too that we're not necessarily over budget. David mentioned at the beginning
Oh, yeah.
that we just take the number and divide it by 2.
Right.
So some projects move faster than others. Some we're still working on through the end of the year. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're over budget at this point.
Right, I wasn't inferring that we were over budget, I was just wondering why we had that bubble there.
Yeah.
That's all, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just for Mr. Felix, real quick, do you have any red flags that you see so far you want to bring to our attention, or about on track?
We're on track. As I said, the only red flags that I see and concerns I have and the city manager have of what is going to be going on with our revenues given the border situation, the slowing down of the wall, and what may be happening with our military travel. That's our concerns that we have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Item C, and thank you, Mr. Felix. Item number C is a possible revision regarding commercial activities in city parks. That was placed on the agenda by Councilmember Benning. He said he'd like to hold off on that. He thinks he's got enough guidance to be able to go back to his commission and have some discussion with them. Is there anybody has any objection on moving on to D, item D? Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll remove that from the agenda. And would report, the item D is a report on recent trips, meetings, and future meetings. I did attend the Rural Transportation Board meeting yesterday. And one of the things I learned was that in the extra, I think it was 80 million that the state got for transportation, there was just over $1 million for Highway 90 and almost just over $5 million for Highway 92. They didn't give us a specific milepost yet, so we'll find that out. None of that was reported to the Sierra Vista MPO, so I'm guessing it's going to be north of the 90. The 90 is going to be north of Huachuca City somewhere, and it'll probably be 92 will probably be the roads on the way to Bisbee because the bridges have been fixed already. So we'll see.
92, you say?
Just over $5 million.
It's not done.
And at first we were told that there wasn't anything for Cochise County, but there were those two that popped up when we went through the list. So again, that's just preliminary information. And as soon as we get more information as to what they are and whether they affect the city, we'll share it with you. But my guess is they probably don't affect the city because the MPO wasn't notified of them.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, they got it.
yeah. So, anybody else? Okay. Future discussion items and council requests. We're gonna have, the next work session in 2 weeks? We're gonna talk about, we're gonna have the education piece for economic development to start that conversation. And I want to get that done before we do our next big thing, which is, I don't remember the dates for the strategic plan.
Strategic plan dates, Mr. Mayor, are March 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Okay. Are there any other future discussion items or council requests?
I was going to ask David to just go over the Moody's investors report with our credit rating, but we tied that up really quick and I didn't get to ask.
Okay, well, one of the things I would suggest, if you're not really familiar with a lot of these financial reports and ratings and what they mean, I would ask, especially the new folks, to get with either Mr. Felix, Mr. Patuchik, or Victoria, and go through there so you have a basic understanding of what that means. And we get a rating on an annual basis, and it's been one of the top ratings for years. But again, it talks about the pension fund and a couple other things that are boogeymen hiding in the shadows, and you need to be aware of that. So the best explanation you would get would be from one of those three folks. And if we have 4 or 5 people that don't really understand, then we probably need to have a blow by blow and on Moody's and getting whoever assists us with that to come in and explain that to us.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Humphrey, there's actually 3 rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P. So they kind of trade off every year, updating, just giving a regular report to investors on what our bond rating is. So the bond rating has stayed stable, which is the good news. They make comments regarding where they think our fund balance should be in terms of reserves, as well as our debt ratios and those kind of things. So overall, our debt is very steady. Our regular debt is very low, as they commented. But now they're having to report on pension liability as part of that debt ratio. So interesting as the regular debt has gone down through the years, we have seen an increase in the pension liability that they're reported on, but the overall debt is, if you look on the chart on that report, is pretty flat. So now that we're attacking the pension liability issue as well as keeping our debt down and reducing that, I feel pretty good about it, actually.
Well, the other thing is you need to understand that these ratings come out so that if we are in a position where we need to borrow money, then that will affect the interest rates that we borrow at. And obviously, the better rating you are, the lower the interest rate is. But we're not in a position right now that looks like we're going to do any serious borrowing When I say serious bond, I'm talking 20, 30, 40 million
Yeah.
a year.
Unless you all want to spend some money, Mayor.
Well, but again, we want to be in position to pay it back, and that's why you keep the bond rating as high as you can.
And actually, we're in good position if you did want to do a bond issue to do that. But I don't foresee that in the near future.
Okay. All right. The last item on the list is Chuck's giving us a current status of COVID-19.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Adam's still providing us the numbers. Most of the news is pretty good. The caseloads are gone down dramatically, both statewide and in the county. So we're seeing improvement there. We're seeing improvement in town. Hospitalizations are down as well. So we're not in a crisis mode with regards to that. Vaccinations are still sketchy. They are rolling out, but the public safety staff that desires to be vaccinated is pretty well taken care of, and we'll start rolling through other key staff as well. As that process continues, I'm looking at, I'm optimistically guessing that around April 1st timeframe, we should be able to start opening our facilities again, and we should have enough key staff vaccinated to be able to do that.
Fully open our facilities because, in fact, we are operating now.
Fully open,
although
yes.
Each facility is a little bit different on what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, so we're shooting for April openings, as a result. So I think I know there's folks that are getting pretty anxious for us to open things up, and as I mentioned before, it is a two-way street between keeping the public safe and keeping the employees safe. And if we can get the employees vaccinated, I feel pretty confident that we can operate, fully, and that day is coming soon, it looks like.
And the other thing I'll share, and you guys correct me if I'm off base here, but I think we're kind of looking at Memorial Day weekend to see if we can do the Sips and Skies and the Three Peak Challenge. Is that what it is? Obviously, the Three Peak Challenge is easy to do because people go out and hike the three peaks.
I mean, it's not easy to do.
Well, I mean, it's easy to put on, put it that way.
It's easy to.
It may not be able to.
It's hard.
Maybe not to do all three on the same day is a challenge. I'll admit that. But as far as setting it up, that's the part that's relatively easy. When we do the sips part, where we bring the wineries in, it's all going to be dependent on whether the governor has changed his
That's
requirements,
really the key.
and how do we work around that, and working with the liquor board, and whether they'll give us the license, because my understanding is the city holds the liquor license for that event. So there may be rules for preparation, number of people together, et cetera, and how the wine is dispensed in the park. But we hope to use that as kind of a template. So when we get to the 4th of July and the other events that are coming on, we'll be back more, each time we'll be a little more back to normal as we go through the year. So the Parks and Rec guys are already working on that.
Yeah, have they been working also on Art in the Park?
Well, yeah, all the other events.
Yeah, 4th of July are in the park. So
4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, I mean, there's a whole list. Yeah,
Trying to sit
even
looking at
concerts,
my
even concerts on
backyard.
Thursday night. So,
it's my feeling that the community really would like to see these events go. And,
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
need to get back to normal
we're
as soon as
kind of at
possible.
the mercy of the governor, so hopefully we'll get guidelines as to how
well,
we can
we'll
operate.
get guidelines, and I know there's a little tit for tat when we're talking public events on numbers and standards, and we're gonna have to go basically get his approval or I shouldn't say his approval, the liquor board's approval on a lot of those things, so we can pull off an event like that. So,
It's time.
okay, anybody else? Seeing nothing else before the council, thank you very much, and we'll see you all Thursday, if not before.